Okay, so how do you avoid probate in Arizona? Um, First thing you got to know in Arizona, unfortunately, sorry, there's two probates. Ugh, really bad news for us who live in Arizona. There's two probates. There's the one that happens after we die, and then there's the one while we're alive. Okay, this is called a guardianship and or a conservatorship. I just call it a living probate. There's living probate. There's the after death probate. Fun stuff to talk about, right? How do you avoid these? Okay, well, just to make sure we're on the same page, you want to avoid these. Trust me, these are not fun. They're a big mess. I mean, okay, are there stories out there where probate went through nice and easy? Yeah, there are. Are there also stories out there where people just paid extra in taxes because, they just didn't care? They had enough money and it didn't really affect anything? Yeah, sure. Totally get it. Totally fine. And that's true. And if that's you, don't worry about it. You go through probate, your family will figure it out. If you have a living probate, you know what? You may not even really know what's happening, so that's okay. But I think we should protect families. I think we should do everything we can in our power to protect our families. I'm working from home. I want to protect my kids. I want to protect my wife. And that's what I've set this up, my services up to do, and that's what I've learned about. So I want to tell you what I think you can do to protect your family. Number one, living probate. This triggers if you are in an emergency, if you're disabled and you cannot make decisions on your own. Arizona calls that incompetent or incapacitated. If that happens, then you can't make decisions for yourself, and somebody's got to make decisions for you. And every single bank, hospital, doctor's office, every single title company, real estate agent, anybody out there that you have to do business with, they're going to want assurances. They're going to want their butt covered, CYA, that they're dealing with someone on your behalf who's legally designated. That way you don't wake up and say, hey, why'd you give away all my money, right? So they're going to want the assurances that it's a legally appointed person. If you don't have that in place, that's what probate is for. It's there as a fail-safe, a gap stop to get someone appointed for you if you haven't done the work to do it, okay? So if you become incapacitated, your family has to actually go file a lawsuit in court and go through that living probate, guardianship, conservatorship process. Super expensive, giant nightmare. We get called in on those during the emergency. The last one we had, I think the gal was called in to take care of her mom and dad. They didn't have documents in place, and she's a single, the only child. Like, of course, she's the one who's going to be taking care of mom and dad. She had to be appointed by the court, and the court, it's going to be about $30,000 for her to be able to get legally appointed to take care of her mom and dad. It's ridiculous. And plus, there's like 3 new attorneys that are appointed by the court. One for mom, one for dad, and then a guardian ad litem. There's a court investigator. It's like you're in the CPS system, but for adults. And really, that's what it is. So that's what a living probate is. And then they watch out, and they watch what you're doing with the money and the doctors and everything. You got to report it all. And so every year it's thousands more dollars in costs and fees to be able to get all that stuff and stay in compliance. Because if you don't stay in compliance, you get in trouble with the court. And then there's probate after death, which isn't as bad, but it's all about the money. It's all about the money. It's all about the money. And whoever's doing it, right, is now the bad guy, because they're going through court, and it just is an ugly, nasty process. We have story after story after story of families just getting ripped apart there. And families that got ripped apart that otherwise wouldn't have gotten ripped apart. But because that process basically says you each need to get your own lawyer, and then now we've got all these lawyers representing all the different siblings, and what do lawyers do? They make things worse, I think, when it gets into that ugly stuff. And just avoid that. Protect your family from that. How do you do that? Okay, here's how to do that. Number one, you got to deal with both. You cannot just avoid probate at death. That's not good enough. It's not going to protect your family, because they will get torn apart in the living probate process along with you. Avoid both of them. Okay. Do not, we hear this a lot, do not run out and put somebody, name people jointly on all your stuff at the bank and at your investment accounts and I'm going to quit claim the house to you. Please don't do that. That will cause you more problems when it comes time for the actual, family to distribute and inherit stuff, because we've seen it time and time again. Even well-meaning kids say, well, they put me on there because, I took care of them at the end of life. And so they wanted me to have this account or this house, and legally, rightfully so. It's really hard to undo that if they're not willing to. So you don't want to put them on there. It also means all of their financial trouble in their life while you're alive is now attached to your stuff. So if you put them joint on everything with you and they go get in a car accident or they get a divorce, all your stuff is going to get dragged into their mess. So just don't do that. And there's a bunch of tax problems that it creates that I'm not going to bore you with, but it will increase the tax bill for them. So don't do that. The best way to do it is to set up some good general durable power of attorney, a good healthcare directives, and a living trust. This is for all the lifetime stuff to avoid that living probate. You need all of those things. The general durable power of attorney is one of the worst documents in Arizona because nobody's required to honor it, but I still recommend you set it up because sometimes we do get it honored. The healthcare directives you need set up to have somebody make your medical decisions, right? You got to have somebody who's appointed for that. And the living trust you need while you're alive, because then people in your family can take care of your businesses. Whoever you put in charge there can take care of your bank accounts, your investments, your real estate, your personal belongings, your car, your whatever. They can take care of all that stuff, okay? And that'll avoid that living probate. Typical cost there is going to be $25,000 kind of at a minimum, and all the way up to $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 at kind of a high average. So avoids a ton of cost there. I mean, $20,000 to $50,000. Probate after death, you do kind of three things. You can set up some beneficiaries on your accounts or your life insurance or your IRAs or your 401ks. Those beneficiaries, they only trigger at death. They don't like if you put a beneficiary on an IRA, that doesn't mean they can get to it while you're alive. They can only get to that after you die. So beneficiaries on whatever you want, and then have a will, a last will and testament, and then have a trust as well. So that living trust that you set up here, it'll also be the same one. It'll just have more instructions about what to do after you pass away. So those three things for those time periods is what we recommend to avoid probate. Now, the most important piece of your living trust isn't really that you set it up, though you have to set it up. It's that you set it up and you put your stuff in there. So that means you go to the bank, you go to your investment advisor, you go to your real estate. I mean, you got to go to get a deed drafted for that, but you got to put everything in the name of your trust. And there's very specific instructions about how to do that and what to do, because you don't want to mess up your tax situation by doing that wrong. So just do that, but do that intentionally on every single account and insurance and investment and just everything you own. If your name is on something, make sure it's in the trust in one way or another. And that will avoid probate. And then you will have protected your family. And I've seen it more times than not. When you do this and you do it right, and then the emergency happens, your family gets to sit down and they get to focus and experience and remember you for what they wanted to remember you by, what you probably wanted them to remember you by, instead of dealing with a big giant mess and forgetting everything you wanted them to know and you wanted to train and teach and love them for. They get to remember the good stuff. So that's what this will do. It will help them remember the good stuff that you wanted them to remember. And they'll get to carry out your wishes. And what we've seen is it will, if it's done right, it will bring the family closer together. Those loved ones that you wanted to bless, it will bring them closer together because they will have a common purpose to work on, and they won't be disagreeing about stuff. I hope that makes sense.